Good morning. Happy Thursday, everybody. It's Carolyn here, holistic anxiety coach. I help those suffering with anxieties to successfully break free from their anxious symptoms. See if we can talk this morning, right? Using a mind and body approach. So today's topic is sensitization. And I saw a lot of interest around this week, which makes total sense because most of us that are suffering with anxiety, instead of just having anxiety like the average person and having it pass, are typically sensitized. Dee Dee, good morning. Thomasine, how are you? So glad you guys could get on today. Happy to see you guys joining. As I go along, if you have questions or comments, feel free to pop them in and I will try to address those for everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in to what this means, what sensitization means, and really how it happens and what to do about it, right? So sensitization may be something you are experiencing if you find yourself feeling constantly on edge. Oh, Thomasine, I'm so glad that you ate eggs for breakfast. I know you've been having a hard time eating, so yay. Yay, Thomasine, good job. Happy to see that. That protein boost is really good for you. Okay, sorry. Let's go. So if you feel constantly on edge, have anxiety symptoms that just seem to like pop up out of nowhere. Hi, Annette. Great to have you join us today. So when, you know, it's so kind of bewildering when this starts happening to you because you're like, okay, what just happened? Why am I feeling anxious? That happens a lot of times when you're sensitized. It's just your body you'll start just feeling anxious out of nowhere. If that's happening to you, you're probably experiencing sensitization. And we have Mickey joining us. Hello, glad you're here today. And Karen, hi, how are you? Great, I'm so glad all of you guys can hop on. Another thing that comes along with sensitization is noticing every little sensation in your body. And just really, you're finding everything feels really exaggerated, right? So most times, once you become sensitized, you will also develop health anxiety. And this is because you become so focused in on the physical sensations that come along with your anxiety, right? So that's where the health anxiety really comes from. And basically what this comes down to, whether you realize it or not, is that you have developed a fear of your actual anxiety, and more specifically the symptoms that come along with your anxiety, which then creates more anxiety and so on, and all of a sudden you are in this big anxiety cycle, right? All right. Dee Dee, so glad you're on, and she says, guilty. Yeah, so of course we don't do this intentionally, but that is kind of what is going on. It's just that you become so sensitive to the symptoms of anxiety that it creates more and more stronger symptoms of anxiety, which freaks you out more, and so on, right? When the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight nervous system, is highly active, it results in persistent nervousness and anxiety. So basically, you start to live in a habitual state of stress. So let me know if this resonates with you. Just that worry and dread that you will start to feel your heart start to race, or your stomach get upset, or you feel like you might faint, or whatever symptoms come up for you. They are different for everybody. Not everybody gets the same symptoms, but those are some very super common ones that people get. And when your body basically adapts to being under chronic stress and anxiety. So it actually changes the hormone cascade in your body. It changes these things so that you're triggered a lot more easily to go into anxiety, and then you focus in on those sensations, and then you get more anxious about the fact that they're happening and what they mean, and that heightens your symptoms even further. Okay. Thomastine's raising her hand. Yep. Dee Dee says, my doctor says it's because of my fibromyalgia causing hypersensitivity. That might absolutely play into it, Dee Dee. But there is mindset work you can do to help keep you from focusing in so much. Because the more you focus in on the sensitivity of those feelings, the more it's going to perpetuate and strengthen those anxious feelings. Excuse me. So where some people can experience, like, you know, for the average Joe that just has the normal anxiety, like say they're giving a speech or whatever, and they're anxious and they're nervous, and then it passes, right? Or you know, a lot of people get nervous when they travel or things like that, but it's just something that's a feeling they have, it passes, and they don't get stuck in it, right? So, you know, some people can experience anxiety just temporarily because it's a normal a human emotion, but they can seem to just move on from it. But for others, it can become pervasive, and this is because the fear response, which is basically what you're feeling when you feel anxiety, can be very intense, both physically and emotionally, and the stronger an emotion, the more real it feels. The more real it feels, the more weight you give it. The more weight you give it, the more you pay attention to it, right? So the fearful thoughts go from like, what if, and all that, to a fact. So you go from like, oh my gosh, why is my heart racing? And what if I'm having a heart attack? And then the next thing you know, you're convinced you're having a heart attack, right? And when you believe anxious thoughts are true, you absolutely end up giving them more attention in order to solve it or get rid of it, which is the natural inclination. That's your natural instinct. Because of course, if you feel you're having these symptoms that feel like dangerous, your natural instinct is, of course, to try to solve it or get rid of it. So then you're paying more attention to it. You're tuning in more, right? And you do this to try to maintain some kind of control over the situation. Like I said, it's just natural instinct. But the more you do this and the more attention you get to it, the more it reinforces itself and becomes a cycle. So let me see what you guys are saying before I go forward. We got Lorraine that joined us. Hi, Lorraine. Good morning. Dee Dee says, agree. Jessica says, I hyper-focus on too many things. Yes, well, most people with anxiety do. That's part of what's creating the kind of the disorder with anxiety, is that hyper-focus on how we're feeling. Okay, Ellie's like, will you just get to how to make it stop? Okay, I will talk about that, Ellie. Dee Dee says, absolutely. Thomasine, so true. I'm learning to just ignore it and get through it. And Karen says, agree. Okay, so now the anxiety persists. Okay, so let me first say the first thing about like what to do about it is being aware of what's going on. That in and of itself is the first step to being able to work with this, right? So as I was saying, the anxiety persists because, one, you're believing what it has to say. So like, what do you feel like? I'm curious, what do you feel like your anxiety is telling you when it comes up? I mean, is it telling you you're going to get in a car crash if you keep driving like this? Is it telling you you're having a heart attack? Is it telling you, like, what is it telling you that you're believing when it comes up for you? And then two, in addition to believing what it has to say, you then, therefore, treat what it has to say with a lot of attention and significance, okay? So now, instead of just fearing the initial what if situation, Okay, so whatever kind of triggered your anxiety, like say it was, traveling and you got a little nervous over traveling. So instead of just fearing the, oh, I'm nervous to kind of to travel, being, away from home for that long, and everybody gets, most people get a little bit of that. But instead of just that, now it becomes you're fearing the fear itself. So what you're fearing is not so much the traveling anymore. What you're fearing is the symptoms that are going to come up with your anxiety. And then you start to develop a lot of anxious habits to cope with that. Okay. So let's see what kind of comments you have. And I'm curious too, what kind of anxious habits do you feel you all have developed to cope? Okay, I'm curious. All right, Dee Dee says danger. Vicious cycle, Peggy says, yes, it is a vicious cycle. It's exactly what's going on. It's this vicious cycle that builds upon itself. Thomasine says, yes, it tells me I'm dying. Jessica says, then I'm going to go crazy and end up in the psych ward. Yes, super common thought. Dee Dee says isolation. So maybe Dee Dee, is that kind of one of the habits you've developed to cope? I'm assuming that is one of the habits that a lot of people with anxiety develop to cope. Is kind of like, their world becomes smaller and smaller, right? Because they start avoiding this, and then as they become more and more sensitized, and the anxiety comes up more readily, even in situations where it didn't before, then they start avoiding that, and they start avoiding, so they're avoiding more and more things. Their world becomes smaller and smaller, and it feels hopeless. It feels helpless. It really feels like, you're definitely not living the life you're meant to be living, right? So my second question is, so after you think about what kind of anxious habits you've developed to cope with your symptoms of anxiety, my question then for you is, how are they working for you? Are they resolving your anxiety in any way? Dee Dee says yes. Ellie also agrees, isolation. Dee Dee says home is my safe place. Yes, that's what happens. That's totally normal when you get caught in this cycle. That's what happens. Okay, so now that you see how anxiety can in fact be based in the habits that you've developed around your stress response, these well-intentioned habits, as you can hopefully see from what I'm saying here, are actually perpetuating your anxiety. So the habits are a natural inclination, like the isolation, the avoiding, the resisting, the trying to either like really focus in on or push away and totally avoid. But either way, it's really a focus. It's really kind of taking over your thoughts, taking over. You're not noticing other things going on around you, and you're not able to participate in your life the way you want because you're so focused in on the symptoms, either fighting it, resisting it, avoiding it, whatever habit you kind of form around that. Not purposefully, it's just kind of what happens, right? Tiffany says impulsive behavior for everything. Yeah. So what kind of things do you impulsively do? Is it kind of an OCD kind of thing to try to keep control kind of thing? Because that's common, because it gives you that, you try to reach for that sense of control since you feel so out of control with these sensations that come up. Peggy says, I exercise when I feel hyper, it helps. Exercise does help. Absolutely, Peggy, because when you have an anxious response, that actually, that adrenaline and all that, burning off that energy helps dissipate that anxious response. It helps bring your body back to more normal levels with those stress hormones. Ellie says, no, it doesn't help. So yeah, these habits we form around it, they're not really helping, right? Thomasine says, the doctor says I'm not dying, I'm healthy. Darn anxiety. Yeah. So our mind tells us this. Yeah. And then the more we believe it, the more our mind keeps telling us. Okay. So one of the keys to breaking free from this cycle is knowing how to change your thoughts, change your habits, and change your behaviors around your anxiety. Unfortunately, a lot of the principles behind it are simple, but they're not easy. And unfortunately, there is no pill or supplement that can take the place of this mindset part of your journey. So I know I always talk about like the mind-body connection, and so there's absolutely things you can do to help tell your body that to send the message to your brain that you are okay, that to help shut that stress response down in the brain, like the 5-5-7 breath that we did in the challenge, like meditation, like exercise, like healthy eating, like, you know, some of these different things that we can do to support our body that therefore supports our brain. And that is definitely a piece of it. But without this mindset piece, without really going into, and like I said, it takes time, but going into how to change your thoughts, habits, and behaviors around your anxiety, you're not going to have long-lasting results.